So, as usual, we'll start with some prayers, and then following that, we'll do a little bit of meditation. So, at the end of the last class, I was talking about how the four establishments of mindfulness connect with the Four Noble Truths. And I'm not sure if that explanation was very clear. And also, probably people were very tired at the end of a 2-hour class. So I thought we could start tonight by reviewing that in a meditative way. So we'll do some reflection on that, and hopefully it'll become more clear. Okay, so let's first imagine we're sitting in the presence of the Buddha. And in fact, it's said that there are always countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas around us all the time, wherever we are, looking upon us with love and compassion, similar to the love and compassion that parents have for their children, but zillions of times more pure and powerful than that. So you can imagine the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, in front of you, and think that that figure represents all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, as well as our spiritual teachers, all the wonderful teachers we've had the good fortune to meet and learn the Dharma from and be inspired by, and all the past masters who've kept the Buddha's teachings alive for all these centuries since the Buddha's time. So we are very grateful to all of those beings, without whom we wouldn't have the chance to learn the Dharma and practice the Dharma. So imagine all those wonderful beings, kind and helpful to us, are embodied by this one figure of the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, made of light, golden light, wearing saffron robes, holding a bowl, touching the earth, face peaceful and smiling, showing his incredible unconditional compassion and love for each and every one of us and every other living being. And you can also think this figure of the Buddha represents all the objects of refuge, all of the three jewels of the Buddha and the Dharma, which mainly refers to true paths and true cessations. And the Sangha, mainly the Aryas, those who've directly realized emptiness, have attained true paths and true cessations, so they're reliable friends along the path. But we can also think of our own spiritual friends, companions who help us learn and practice the Dharma as the Sangha. So really feel that these three jewels of refuge are objects that we can entrust ourselves to, rely upon, take as our guides in the way we live our life. And feel the wish that every other living being could gain this same awareness of the value, the incredible good qualities of the three jewels, and wish to also rely upon them to free themselves from all suffering and achieve genuine peace and happiness. So you can imagine all other beings around us as we recite the prayers. Imagine they're taking refuge along with us and receiving the benefit of this practice along with us. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Now we'll recite the mantra of the Buddha 7 times. While reciting it, imagine light flowing from the Buddha's figure in front of you, filling your body and mind, purifying everything that's negative, all sickness and other kinds of physical suffering, as well as mental suffering. And the causes of suffering are karma, unwise, unskillful karma we created in the past, and afflictions like attachment, anger, ignorance, and so on that motivate us to create karma and perpetuate suffering. So imagine all these things being purified, becoming non-existent, disappearing into space. The light also nourishes our positive potential, all the good qualities we have in our mind, so that they can grow greater and stronger and help our mind to progress along the path to full enlightenment, so we can become Buddhas ourselves. And you can imagine the light going to all the other sentient beings surrounding you throughout the universe, wherever they are. And it has the same effect of purifying all suffering and its causes and nourishing their positive potential to be free of all suffering and achieve all happiness up to the highest happiness of enlightenment. Taya ta om mane mane maha mane soha. Taya ta om mane mane maha mane soha. Taya ta om mane mane Soha. Tayata Om Mune Mune Mahamanaye 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 Soha. So take a few moments to make sure your motivation for being here, participating in this class, is an altruistic one. If you are comfortable with bodhicitta, the aspiration to become a Buddha, fully enlightened to help all living beings, you can bring that into your mind. If that may be too difficult for you to generate, then try to at least feel the wish to benefit others as much as you can in this life. Benefit other people, other beings in the world, and that you want to learn something here tonight that will enable you to be more beneficial to others. Then you can do the meditation on the breathing for a few more minutes to settle down your mind in the present, the here and now, letting go of any other thoughts that may be in your mind of the past, things you did today, yesterday, or any time in the past, as well as thoughts of the future, what you're going to do later tonight, tomorrow, and so on. Just let go of those thoughts and let your mind, your awareness be in the present, right here, in this place, wherever you are, and right now in the present moment. So the first of the 4 establishments of mindfulness is on the body. See if you can recall ever having the notion, the sense that A body, could be your own body or somebody else's body, is something really pure, wonderful, delightful, even perfect. You ever had that kind of experience? So let's check if that notion is accurate and realistic. Think about some of the things that lie inside the body: bones, blood, intestines, muscles, various organs. So, how do you feel about those? And what happens as the body gets older? Bring to mind a person you have seen, someone who's in their 80s or 90s, with sagging flesh, masses of wrinkles, red and watery eyes, maybe yellow teeth. So that person once had an attractive, youthful body, but this is what inevitably happens with age. So do you find such an aged body attractive and wonderful? And eventually, the body becomes a corpse, something we usually find frightening, and it quickly decomposes, becomes something that looks awful and smells awful, and something everybody wants to dispose of as quickly as possible. So do you find such a body, a deceased body, wonderful and attractive? And even while we're alive, even while we're young, the body is susceptible to all kinds of problems: sickness, injuries, aches and pains, hunger and thirst, heat and cold. So, considering these facts, these realities about the body, does it make sense to think that bodies are wonderful, pure, and perfect? So, contemplations such as these lead us to understand the first truth of the Aryas, true suffering or true dukkha, and to generate renunciation, the determination to free ourselves from all suffering and the causes of suffering. And then the second of the four establishments of mindfulness is about feelings. So feelings are part of our mind. It's a mental factor. And every moment we are experiencing one of the three types of feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. We like the pleasant feelings. We don't like the unpleasant ones. And we would like the neutral ones to last. They're kind of comfortable. But none of these feelings last. They're momentary. They last only a brief moment, then they vanish. So check to see if that's true. And all of our feelings are in the nature of suffering or dukkha. So they themselves are the three types of suffering, and they usually lead to further suffering because they give rise to craving for pleasant feelings, craving to be separated from unpleasant feelings, painful feelings, and craving for continuation of neutral feelings. And craving is one of the main factors that keeps us in samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth. So it's one of the things that forces us to have to die and take rebirth again and again without any choice or control. So Geshe Rapton said, understanding the unsatisfactory nature of feelings helps us to understand craving. And knowing this leads us to understand that ignorance is the source of suffering. In this way, we come to understand true origins of suffering, which is the second truth of the Aryas. And the third establishment of mindfulness is on the mind. And practicing mindfulness of the mind leads us to understand that our mind is impermanent. It's always changing. Different mental states arise and pass away in each moment. Nothing in the mind is fixed and permanent. It's completely fluid, like a stream or river. And this helps us to recognize that the mind is empty of an independent I. We have an innate sense that there's a solid, real, independent I, me, myself. And we usually identify it with our mind. But when we recognize the impermanent nature of the mind, then such a notion of a independent I is dispelled. You can't find anything in the mind that corresponds with that kind of a self or I. And this awareness also dispels fear of annihilation, which can arise when we are dying, because we understand that the mind continues without end. So even though it's impermanent, changing every moment, it doesn't have an end. It just keeps going, even beyond this life. And all these understandings lead us to have the wish to attain the cessation of suffering and its causes, ignorance and other afflictive mental states, which keep our mind imprisoned in suffering, in samsara. And in this way, the establishment of mindfulness of the mind connects us with the third truth of the Aryas, true cessations. The fourth and final establishment of mindfulness is on phenomena, which mainly refers to mental factors, other aspects of our mind. And so this practice involves knowing which mental factors are to be cultivated, the virtuous ones like faith, compassion, non-attachment, and so on. And on the other hand, which mental factors are to be overcome or eliminated, the ones that cause suffering, like anger, attachment, arrogance, ignorance, and so on. So this is what we need to do in order to progress on the path to liberation and enlightenment. This is mainly what it means to follow the path, is to work on our mind and bring about a transformation such that the disturbing, harmful, destructive mental states are reduced and then eliminated, and then the positive ones, the ones that bring peace and happiness and higher states of being, those are cultivated. So that's how this practice connects us with the fourth truth of the Aryas, true paths. So, as a conclusion to this meditation, see if you can aspire to at least start engaging in these four establishments of mindfulness to whatever extent you're able to, even just taking the first baby steps. Understanding that these are essential practices for progressing on the path to enlightenment. So that's the best thing you can do for yourself and the best thing you can do for others. So we have been looking at these four establishments of mindfulness for the last 2 months. It's quite a while. There's still much more one could learn about and practice and so on, but we do have to move on. So I've just got a little bit more to share about the four establishments of mindfulness, and then we will move on to the next group of factors among the 37 harmonies. So if we could have the slides on the screen. So I meant to show this one last week, but ran out of time. And so it kind of answers the question, in case anybody is wondering, why these four objects? Why did the Buddha recommend that we practice mindfulness with those four objects: body, feelings, mind, and phenomena? So there's a couple of answers to that question. One is in Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Kosha, Treasury of Knowledge, which is mainly, it's the text studied in the monasteries to understand the Vaibhashika school. It explains the tenets of the Vaibhashika system, but there's a lot of information in there that is compatible and common to all the different schools. Anyway, so what he says is the four Oh, so EM is establishment of mindfulness. So just to keep it short. So he says the 4 establishments of mindfulness are antidotes to 4 mistaken conceptions of apprehending bodies as pure, feelings as happiness, minds as permanent, and phenomena as a self. So you might remember we, some time ago, we did look at these 4 mistaken conceptions, and you may have encountered them in other places as well. So it said that we ordinary beings, who aren't very highly evolved in our spiritual practice, we have these in our mind. We see that things which are actually impermanent, we see them as permanent and unchanging. And also, well, not the right order here. Things that are not pure, things that are impure, we see them as pure, wonderful, fantastic. And things that are actually suffering and unsatisfactory, we see them as happiness and wonderful. And then things which lack a self, we see them as having a self. So as long as those 4 misconceptions exist in our mind, we remain stuck in samsara. So it should be pretty clear that by meditating. So last week, what we looked at was with each of the 4 objects, the 4 objects of this practice, there's specific characteristics for each one and general characteristics that apply to all 4. And so with regard to the specific characteristics, the specific characteristic of the body was that it's impure. So if we meditate on that, then that will counteract the mistaken conception of the body being pure, like we just looked at in this meditation. And then with regard to the second object, feelings, the specific characteristic of feelings is that they're unsatisfactory. So meditating on that, getting a awareness of that will counteract the misconception that thinks feelings are happiness, feelings are wonderful. I love my feelings. I'm attached to my feelings. And then the specific characteristic of the mind to meditate on is its impermanence, the fact that the mind is not something fixed and solid and permanent, but it's constantly moving and changing, never the same from one moment to the next. So by meditating on that, we'll overcome this misconception that thinks the mind is permanent. And then the specific characteristic of phenomena was having a self, being a self or having a self. And so by meditating on that, we'll realize it doesn't have a self, it's selfless. So that overcomes the misconception of phenomena as having a self. So there, hopefully that's not too complicated. But yeah, meditating on the specific characteristics of each of the 4, plus the general characteristics of all the 4, then we'll overcome these 4 misconceptions. So that's from from Vasubandhu's text, the Abhidhammakosha. And then in the Mahayana tradition, Mahayana texts like the Ornament and its commentaries give a somewhat different reason for the 4. So they give another list of conceptual errors that we have, and they all revolve around our sense of a self or an I. So there's a sense of a real me, a real self, a real I. And then based on that, we have these different misconceptions about those 4 objects, as here on the slide. So the first one with regard to the bodies is we have the conception of the body being the basis or the abode of the I. So we feel like there's a real I, a real me, and it's living somewhere inside the body. Does that sound familiar? I mean, that's my experience. I'm somewhere inside of this body. So the body, we believe or grasp at the body as being the abode, the residence of the self, or the basis of the self. Then, with regard to feelings, we regard feelings as what the self enjoys and experiences. So again, there's this sense of a real self, a real solid, concrete, independent I, and then our feelings are just coming up all the time. So then we identify with our feelings. I am happy. I am unhappy. I am indifferent. And so, yeah, we tend to identify with and see our feelings as something that the self enjoys and experiences. We see feelings as things experienced by a real objective self. And we also see our feelings as being real and permanent, whereas in fact they are impermanent. They're very much like bubbles coming and going. Then, with regard to the mind, we have this conception of the mind being the thing which is the self. Okay, so when it comes to what is the self, what do we point to as the self, we tend to think of our mind as being the actual self. I am that which thinks and feels and perceives. So in following the Buddha's footsteps, it says, we adhere to the false belief that the mind is an independent self. And all the tenet systems below Prasangika Madhyamaka identify the mind or the continuity of the mind or one type of the mind as the ultimate illustration of the self. So if you study tenets, the tenet systems, then they all posit different things as being the self. And it's usually some aspect of the mind, either the mind itself, the continuum of the mind, or whatever. But the Prasangikas, they say that it's the mere I, the I that is just designated or imputed independence on the body and mind. That is the illustration of the person. So it shows that even among the Buddhist schools, many of them also identify the mind as the person, or some part of the mind as the person. But the Prasangikas refute that, and they say, no. So I've heard one of my teachers, and also one of Venerable Children's teachers, Kensur Jamba Tekchok, I've heard him say that the mind, specifically the mental consciousness, is actually the main basis of designation for the I. So we say the I is just designated or imputed on our aggregates, but there's many aggregates. There's our body and all the parts of our body. There's the mind and all the parts of the mind. So there's many different parts to our aggregates. So he says that the main thing that we designate I onto is the mental consciousness, because that's the thing that continues from life to life. Each lifetime our body is left behind, and our sense experiences are left behind as well, but it's the mental consciousness that continues. So even though that's kind of the main basis for imputing self or I, but it itself isn't the self. It would not be correct to say that that is the self, because according to Prasangika, the basis, whatever is a basis of designation, a basis of imputation, cannot be the imputed object, what is imputed onto it. That would be false if one were to assert that. Like I mentioned this last week, if you said that the basis of designation was the imputed object, then I think there would be the fault that we wouldn't have to give anything names. Things would already have names. Parents wouldn't have to figure out what to call their baby, and they come up with some new device, and you don't get to give it a name because it already has a name. So yeah, there are these contests sometimes, some new kind of flower or some new kind of star or planet or mountain, they have contests to come up with the best name for it. So we wouldn't be able to have those kind of names because the object would already have a name. So the whole process of naming things, giving names to things would be irrelevant, would be redundant because things already have their names. So the basis for a name, the basis for imputing things cannot be the object that is imputed in relation to them. Anyway, that's a very complex point, but the point is that it wouldn't be right to say that our mind is the I, is the self. But that's not easy to understand. We have to learn a lot and meditate a lot to get that one. And then the fourth sort of misconception we have is that phenomena are what afflicts the self and purifies the self. So again, phenomena can refer to lots of different things, but the main type of phenomena in this practice are mental factors. And among mental factors, many different kinds of mental factors, some are afflictive, like anger, attachment, arrogance, jealousy, and so on. And so a big part of our practice is to recognize those and reduce them and eventually be free of them altogether, because those are the things that afflict us, that make us suffer. And then there's other mental factors that are positive, constructive, like compassion and love and non-attachment and wisdom. So those are things that are beneficial for us, and we want to cultivate those. But if we have this sense that there's a real I, a real independent, objectively existing I, and then there are these afflictive mental factors that make me suffer, and these other mental factors that are good for me, then this is a misconception. This is a wrong way of thinking. So we need to overcome that. And so in the practice of mindfulness with regard to phenomena, we need to understand that we have to abandon grasping phenomena, like these mental factors are things that either afflict this real I or purify, benefit this real I. So following the Buddha's footsteps says, we conceive phenomena, in particular mental factors, as what make the self afflictive or worthwhile. I, meaning this real I have so many problems with anger and jealousy. Okay, so it may be true, but if the basis of this is we see this I as being something real and objectively existing, then that's an error. That's a mistake. Or on the other hand, if we think I am worthwhile because I am mindful, I make effort, I have concentration and wisdom. So again, this is we do want to develop those positive mental factors, but if it's all done on the basis of a real solid objectively existing I who has these mental factors, then this is an error. And so the ultimate purpose of cultivating these 4 establishments of mindfulness is to overcome, get rid of that sense of a real, solid, independent, objectively existing I. So, foundation of, following the Buddha's footsteps says, the way the self is conceived in each of these 4 instances is erroneous. There is a notion of a solid personal identity. We see ourselves as standing alone, independent from everything else, and view all other things, including our body, our feelings, our mind, and phenomena, as arranged around that self. In addition, our present way of conceiving and relating to our body, feelings, mind, and phenomena increases our misconception of self. So I hope that's not too complicated, but it's like there's kind of 4 different misconceptions, or actually 8, two sets of 4 misconceptions that are overcome by practicing the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And if we don't overcome those misconceptions, they keep us stuck, keep us in samsara with all its suffering and problems. So anyway, I just wanted to share that because it's just some more details about the practice and why those 4 objects are used in the practice of mindfulness. And then at the end of the explanation of the 4 establishments of mindfulness in the book, Volume 4, Following the Buddha's Footsteps, His Holiness said some things about the benefit of the practice. He says, in short, seeing the body as impure, we investigate its origins and see that it came from karma created by afflictions. Afflictions arose due to afflictive feelings. Tracing the origin of feelings leads us to investigate the nature of mind. And through this, we see that the mind is neutral and its nature is pure. So even though there's all these afflictions in the mind, but the nature of the mind itself is not afflicted. It's not one with the afflictions. It's actually pure. The afflictions can be removed. Having the wish for happiness, we seek a method to free the mind from the afflictions which arise from feelings, which in turn keep us bound to this impure body. So they're all connected in different ways. Investigating the method to attain happiness, we discern what to cultivate and what to abandon on the path. Through mindfulness and probing wisdom, we see that although the body, feelings, mind, and mental factors are the basis of designation of the person, they are not the person. So we do have to investigate each of these 4 aspects, our body, our feelings, our mind, and then phenomena, mainly mental factors. We need to really understand what their nature is. But we also need to understand none of them is the self. None of them is a fixed, permanent, independent I. So that's the big benefit, the grand prize that we'll get from this practice, freeing our mind from that grasping at a real self. There is no independent person that is findable by analysis, seeking the person's ultimate mode of existence. The I is empty of inherent existence. Continuous meditation on this cuts the ignorance that is the root of samsara. And then he talks about how when doing the 4 establishments of mindfulness, we need to observe our experiences and not just think about them intellectually. So it's not enough just to learn all the words, all the terms, all the different practices, and just think about them intellectually, but really check what is going on in our very experience. And he says the real purpose of the practice is becoming free of samsara. But these practices can also help us understand our daily life experiences. So they can be practical in our present life. So, for example, people often get surprised and upset when something happens to their body. They get sick or injured or notice more wrinkles, more signs of age. They get really upset about that. But if we really understood the nature of our body, how it's impure and impermanent and so on, we wouldn't find such things surprising and upsetting at all. So it kind of helps us to be more at ease with those changes that happen in life. And then finally, he says, this is the Dalai Lama, since the four establishments of mindfulness eliminate the four distorted conceptions and bring understanding of the four truths, it is a comprehensive and profound practice. By practicing, as explained, our positive qualities will grow and correct understanding will increase in power, so that liberation and awakening will become not only an aspiration, but a reality. For their true purpose to be accomplished and maximum benefit derived, these practices are done with refuge in the three jewels and the aspiration to attain liberation or full awakening. So we need to make sure that we have the right motivation when doing these practices. And those of us who aspire to follow the Bodhisattva's path and reach Buddhahood need to make sure our motivation is bodhicitta, the aspiration to become enlightened. And earlier, at the beginning of this section, I read this before, but I'll read it again. He says that he wants to encourage Tibetan Buddhists to do these practices. They're not that often found. They're not practiced that much in the Tibetan tradition, but he's really encouraging us to do them. And that we meditate on them with the bodhicitta motivation and the prasangika view of emptiness. And so that's how we can make these practices Mahayana and the cause of enlightenment, having the bodhicitta motivation. So even doing meditation on the breathing or meditation on our, mindfulness of our body, movements and postures and so on. So if we're doing that with bodhicitta, the wish to become Buddha to help all living beings, then it becomes Mahayana. And ideally, we also need to have the understanding of emptiness. That's more difficult to have. But, whatever level of understanding of emptiness we have, to bring that in as well. And with regard to that, the understanding of emptiness, some of us have been following this course on Lama Tsongkhapa's Illumination of the Thought, which is commentary to Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka. And in the 4th chapter of that text, he talks about how the Bodhisattva on the 4th ground experiences this copper-colored radiance due to meditation on the 37 harmonies with enlightenment, which these 4 establishments of mindfulness are part of. And in Lama Tsongkhapa, in his commentary, talks about coarse and subtle 37 harmonies. That's not mentioned in the Ornament for Clear Realization and its commentaries, because it's only a topic relevant to the prasangika view. So the coarse 37 harmonies would be related to coarse selflessness, and coarse selflessness is the emptiness of a self-supporting, substantially existent self. So that's a level of selflessness or emptiness that's relatively coarse. And then the subtle 37 harmonies would be related to subtle selflessness, which is the emptiness of inherently existing self or I. Oh, bug. Karmic connection. So it's only the prasangikas who talk about that subtle level of selflessness. So that's why you only find this explanation in prasangika text. So I was thinking about this distinction between coarse and subtle 37 harmonies. And what I thought was that, let's say there's a person who's practicing like the 4 establishments of mindfulness, and they're a follower of one of the other non-prasangika schools, like maybe Vaibhashika or Sautrantika. So that's their tenet system. And so such a person, when they're practicing the 4 establishments of mindfulness, they would do it with the idea that the root of samsara is grasping at a self-supporting, substantially existent self. And that's the kind of ignorance they're trying to overcome. So their goal is to overcome that ignorance of grasping a self-supporting, substantially existent self. So when they're meditating on the mindfulness of the body, then they would be thinking that the body is a product of karma and afflictions, which are based on that kind of ignorance, grasping a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. So that ignorance is what gave rise to this contaminated body, this polluted body. And so that's the view they would have when they're doing meditation on the body. And the same with feelings. They would see the feelings as, related to a self-sufficient, substantial, grasping at a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, and so on, and mind and phenomena. And then when they're meditating on selflessness, it would be that type of selflessness, the emptiness of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self or I. So that view would color their way of practicing these 4 establishments of mindfulness. Does that make sense? But then a person who's a follower of the prasangika tenets would have a different view. So they would think that the root of samsara is the ignorance grasping at a inherently existing self, which is a subtler kind of wrong view about the self, about the I. So they would see that as the root of samsara. So when they're meditating on the body, doing mindfulness of the body, they would have the awareness that this body, contaminated, polluted body, is the result of ignorance, believing in inherently existing self or I, and that in turn gives rise to karma and afflictions and so on. So their view of body and feelings and mind and phenomena would be that they are all the result of, the product of that kind of ignorance, that very deep, subtle ignorance. And then when they're meditating on selflessness, then it would be that, mainly that type of selflessness, emptiness of an inherently existing self or I. However, Lama Tsongkhapa says the bodhisattva has to become expert in both coarse and subtle aspects, both, not just the subtle, but also the coarse 37 harmonies. So there's a lot of work to do. Sometimes it can seem sort of overwhelming, all the things one has to do to follow the path. But so we just start where we can, do what we can, and just, make little baby steps towards the goal, slowly, slowly. Okay, any questions about any of that before we move on to start looking at other groups of the 37 harmonies. Anybody
Excuse me,
online?
Venerable, there is a question from Michael, I think. Go ahead, Michael.
Hi, thank you very much for this. I have a question of something that was brought up a little bit earlier in tonight's teaching about the impermanence of the mind and that it's always changing. What about the clarity and luminosity of the mind? Is that always changing too? Isn't that not changing? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the way they talk about it, it sometimes almost sounds like it's always there. I mean, it is always there, but that doesn't mean it's permanent and unchanging. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have any firsthand experience of this, but we did, I think last week we did a little bit of meditation on that based on some instructions from His Holiness. And yeah, so it's like every moment there's this clarity and luminosity. That's the conventional nature of the mind. So that's present every moment, but that doesn't mean it's something fixed and permanent and always exactly the same. So it's more like each moment there's a mind arising. It's mainly the mental consciousness. That's the main part of the mind that's continuously there. The sense consciousnesses, come and go. They're not always present, but the mental consciousness is always there. And the clarity and luminosity, the clarity and cognizance, clear and knowing nature of the mental consciousness is always there. So it's always there, but it's also always changing. So both of those things are possible.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? I think, I think the ideal thing is to get an experience of that, like His Holiness talks about, but that's not always so easy. So in the meantime, we just try to get an intellectual understanding, a conceptual understanding of what that means. Anyone here have a question?
In the list of distorted views that Jetsun Chogi Gyaltsen is saying that we're working to overcome, there does self refer to self of persons?
Let me go back and look. Let's see. That phenomena is, or what afflicts the self. The conception of Jetsun Chogi Gyaltsen. The wrong conception that we have is phenomena are things that either afflict or purify the self. And yeah, it's talking about a personal self. Well, again, this is the commentary to the Ornament, so they wouldn't talk about inherently existent self. That's only Prasangika, but we could say it truly exists. Mainly the self-sufficient, substantially existent self. That's the main type of self or misconception of self that's to be overcome. But if you're a Prasangika practitioner, then your wish would be to overcome the grasping at a inherently existing self. Okay, so let's go on. And first of all, on the slides, the next slide is a repeat something I showed, I think, in the very first class. This is a list of the 7 groups of the 37 harmonies. So there's 37 harmonies, but they come in these different sets or groups. So the first group is the 4, here it's called the 4 close placements of mindfulness. It's also called the 4 establishments of mindfulness. So that's the one we've been talking about all this time. And so now the second group are called the 4 correct abandonings. And so we'll try to cover those tonight. And it says here, the description of this group are the path that arises from effort. So these are mainly related to effort. And the word effort here is the same as what we normally call joyous effort. I like joyous effort. Effort can sometimes sound a bit like you have to work really hard, but joyous effort shows that, yeah, this kind of effort needs to be joyful. You need to take delight in doing it. And the full attainment of these 4 correct abandonings is the middle level of the path of accumulation. So that's the first of the 5 paths. The second level, it has 3 levels, small, middle, and great. So the middle level of the path of accumulation. So that's when they're fully attained. But of course, prior to that, we have to start practicing them to be able to get to that point. And yeah, so let's go on and look at these. Then there's different ways of translating. So could we have the next slide? Different ways that these are translated. And so the Tibetan term is, it's Yangdak Pongwa, which can be translated as correct or perfect abandoning. But the volume 4 says that the Sanskrit term and also the Pali term, which is pradana, that they have the meaning of striving or exertion rather than abandoning. And so that seems to be a more accurate term because they all involve joyous effort and exertion, striving. And only one of the 4 actually involves abandoning anything. But I did look up the Tibetan term pongwa in the dictionary, and I noticed that normally it has the sense of abandon, but it also has the sense of effort or endeavor. So it just depends on how you want to translate that. But it makes more sense to call them strivings or endeavors. Thupten Jinpa translated them as 4 perfect endeavors. Anyway, and so a definition of these given in Jetsun Chokyi Gyaltsen's commentary is an exalted knower of one who has entered the path that is a joyous effort. So these are minds, consciousnesses. They're highly accomplished minds. They're not just ordinary minds, but they have to be in the mind of a person who's on a path. And they are joyous effort, which is the same term as used for the 4th perfection of joyous effort. And they take delight in practicing what is to be practiced and discarding what is to be discarded. So it's basically taking delight in getting rid of what needs to be gotten rid of and developing or practicing what needs to be practiced. And there's a connection between the 4 establishments of mindfulness, which is the first group of the 37 harmonies, and this group, the second group. So it's explained in following the Buddha's footsteps. Meditation on the fourth establishment of mindfulness, the mindfulness of phenomena, inspires us to develop positive qualities and remove disturbing emotions. And the four supreme strivings are the way to do that. So if you remember, in the four establishments of mindfulness, the fourth one is on phenomena, and phenomena mainly refers to mental factors, those positive ones that are to be cultivated, like faith and compassion and so forth, and then the afflictive ones that we want to get rid of, like attachment and anger and so on. So we focus mainly on those two groups of mental factors. And so in the case of the four establishments of mindfulness, we're looking at these mental factors, we're examining them, we're becoming more aware of them and how they're impermanent and so forth, and seeing more clearly, oh yes, I really want to get rid of these negative ones. They just cause so much suffering and so much problems. I have to overcome them. And the positive ones, oh yes, I really want to develop those. Those are the things that bring peace and happiness and enlightenment and so on. So you generate this strong wish to do that kind of work. And then this group, the four supreme strivings, this is what you do. This is the job. This is the actual methods to accomplish that. So here are the four. The first one is preventing the arisal of non-virtues that have not arisen. So for example, at this moment, I'm not angry, I don't think. I'm not feeling angry at anybody. But I want to make sure that I don't get angry. Yeah, I want to prevent anger from arising in my mind. So that would be an example of the first one. And then the second is abandoning non-virtues already arisen. So if something like anger has arisen in the mind, then you want to make sure that you get rid of that as quickly as possible. You don't let it hang around, because it just creates so much suffering and problems. And then the third is generating virtues not arisen. So maybe there's certain positive qualities that you haven't yet developed, and you recognize, oh, those are good qualities. I want to develop those qualities. And so you look for how to do that, and you work on that. You apply exertion to developing those. And then the fourth is maintaining and increasing virtues already arisen. So, if you do have some virtuous quality, compassion, love, the wish to live ethically, and so on, then you want to make sure that that doesn't degenerate. You don't lose that. You maintain it and increase it. So, do any of these ring a bell? Which ones? Okay, what I was thinking specifically was when I first encountered these four, I thought of this prayer that we recite at the end of teachings. One version is, may the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase more and more. So the last two, that's like a prayer praying for bodhicitta that hasn't yet arisen. May it arise, and whatever has arisen may not degenerate, but increase more and more. I thought, oh yeah, we're already praying for that. Of course, we have to do more than just pray for it. We have to put a lot more exertion into it. But yeah. But yes, all four, of course. We hear these again and again in the teachings, how we need to work on our mind and stop negative thoughts from arising, overcome those that have arisen, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so the first two are related to afflictive states of mind, things like anger and attachment and jealousy and so on and so forth. And the latter two are, and it's not just mental states, but also actions, like non-virtuous actions, like killing and stealing and so forth. So we really want to make sure we don't get involved in those actions. And if we start to have an inclination towards them, a motivation to do any of them, then to abandon that, to overcome that. So it's both with regard to non-virtuous states of mind and non-virtuous actions. And so this requires mindfulness as well as introspective awareness, which one has already developed a lot through the practice of the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And then the second 2 are practiced in relation to virtuous, positive qualities like love and compassion, and also virtuous actions such as generosity, ethical conduct, and so forth. So we want to generate and practice those that we haven't yet done, haven't already developed, and then make sure that those which we have developed don't diminish. So like ethical conduct, we all have a certain level of practice of that. Some of us have taken precepts, and we know at the time of taking precepts, we have very strong determination. This is something really precious and valuable. I really want to keep these precepts, and feel a lot of joy that we're taking these precepts. But after some time, that kind of initial enthusiasm might kind of fade, and we might start feeling, oh, why did I do this? And maybe it's like a burden. So we really want to make sure we don't go down that path. And we want to, maintain our vows and our precepts and our practices and increase them even more. So the following in the Buddha's footsteps says that all 4 of these are forms of effort. Again, that means joyous effort, which is one of the virtuous mental factors. And they're said to be supreme because combined with the bodhicitta motivation, they will lead to full awakening. So then the next slide shows 4 steps in the practice of these. 5 steps, sorry. And it contains a quotation in the book. There's a quotation from the Sutra on the 10 Grounds. So this is a Mahayana Sutra. And this quotation says, the 4 supreme strivings are like this. This is Buddha talking, okay. First, to prevent the arising of non-virtues that have not yet arisen. He generates aspiration, makes effort, arouses energy, holds the mind firmly, and steadfastly places the mind. So there are these 5 steps for each of the practice. So I won't read all of them, but for each of the 4, the Buddha mentions these 5 steps. And the order, the reason for the order is because the 4 supreme strivings are meditation practices to enhance serenity and insight. So these are practices to increase serenity or calm abiding, very, very strong concentration, and insight into the true nature of things. So the first step is generating aspiration. So we need to have the aspiration to do these practices. We have to want to do these practices, and nobody can make us do them. So it has to come from within ourselves. So we need to have this aspiration. Then the second step is making effort. So making effort is said to be a remedy to an imbalance of serenity and insight. So sometimes it can happen during meditation that the insight or the analytical part of the practice may be more powerful, and then that can cause the mind to be out of balance, like a lamp in the wind, like a flame in the wind. So if we have too much insight, not enough serenity or stability, then the mind is unstable. And so when when the lamp of serenity isn't stable, then suchness, which is what we're trying to understand, cannot be held firmly in the mind. So the remedy to this is to strengthen serenity, strengthen stability of mind, concentration. But there's other times when serenity is strong, concentration is strong, but insight is weak. And when that happens, then it's difficult to see the object, suchness, ultimate reality, ultimate truth. It doesn't appear clearly. And so we need to have a balance. We need to learn how to balance those two factors of calm abiding, single-pointed concentration, and insight, analyzing the object to understand it. So that's what making effort is about. Arousing energy, the third step, means eliminating laxity and excitement, or laxity and restlessness. Those are the two main obstacles to serenity. Laxity is when the mind is kind of sunk, lethargic, not really bright and vivid. Restlessness or excitement is when the mind is very agitated. So we need to overcome those two faults. So that's the meaning of arousing energy. Holding the mind firmly is the remedy to laxity. When laxity arises in the mind is drawn inside, becomes kind of withdrawn, and there's a lack of intensity, clarity. That's not happening. So we need to apply antidotes to laxity and uplift the mind. For example, visualizing light, or contemplating topics that will uplift our energy, revive our energy, like precious human life, qualities of the Buddha, and so on. So when we notice laxity, we need to overcome that, apply antidotes to that. So that's what holding the mind firmly means. Then the fifth step, steadfastly placing the mind. This is the remedy to restlessness or excitement. So that's when the mind is very agitated, very distracted, can't stay still. So there's certain antidotes to that, such as contemplating death, impermanence, things that will sober the mind, make the mind more sober, more calm. Also, contemplating the breath is a good antidote to restlessness. So that's just briefly what those different steps mean. So since the first step in this process is generating aspiration, having aspiration to do these practices, so how do you think we can do that? What are some ways we can generate aspiration to engage in these four strivings?
First, learn the advantages or why we would want to do this.
It's like the carrot. There's also the stick. The disadvantages of not doing them. So sometimes one works better than the other. Sometimes you need the carrot, other times you need the stick. But I find that approach very helpful. The pros and the cons, yeah, basically looking at the pros and the cons. What happens if I don't do them? And what happens if I do them? So that's a good way to get energized. Any other ideas, any other ways to have the aspiration to do these?
Would being inspired by the stories of people who have accomplished this be appropriate here?
Sure. Yeah. That's why often the teachers will tell us stories about the Buddha, about Milarepa, about Lama Tsongkhapa, these great practitioners of the past and what they did. And that can be very inspiring. They were people once upon a time, people like us, and they aroused this energy and did these practices and accomplished these goals. So yeah, that's very helpful. Just to know that it can be done. Others have done it, and we can do it too. Anyone else? Any ideas? I mean, just the Lam Rim. Learning about the nature of samsara and how dreadful it is, how it's like a horror movie or like a prison or like an ocean full of sea monsters and dangers and so on. And just wanting to get out of samsara, and then thinking about all the other sentient beings who are in samsara, and they basically want to be free of suffering like we do, and they've all been helpful to us. So yeah, all these wonderful topics in the Lam Rim are very inspiring to want to get ourselves out and want to get others out as well. So what do we have to do? Basically, give up non-virtue and practice virtue. So I think, yeah, these 4 supreme strivings is kind of a nice little summarization of what we need to do.
What also came to mind is that verse, the Buddha's a summary of the Buddha's teachings. Do not perform any non-virtuous actions, perform only virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely. This is the teaching of the Buddha.
Yeah, it's a wonderful verse. So much. The essence of Buddha's teachings in one verse. So, yeah, I have some more information from the Pali tradition. So in the Pali tradition, we also have these 4 supreme strivings, and one source is in the Samyutta Nikaya. I think that's the connected discourses of the Buddha. And they also have these different steps of aspiration and so forth, but a little bit different terms. So there's an example of regarding the first of the 4. So the first of the 4 supreme strivings is preventing the arisal of non-virtues if they haven't already arisen. So stopping them from arising. So just using that as an example. It says the practitioner generates the aspiration to do this, to not let non-virtues happen. And then they apply effort. For example, restraining the senses and the mind. So how do we stop the arisal of non-virtue like attachment, aversion, and so on? Is to restrain our senses, restrain our mind. So some examples of this from following in the Buddha's footsteps. Restraining our eyes from looking at all the ads on our digital devices. So that's something we can do when we're scrolling through the internet or whatever. There's these, and often they're really like rare. They make them so they're really trying to catch your eyes. It's crazy. Yeah, so restraining ourselves from looking at those things, so that can prevent greed and attachment from arising. And restraining our mind from mulling over others' faults, and that will stop malice from consuming the mind. So those are some practical things we can do to, not allow negative states of mind, afflictive states of mind from coming up. So I think we can just watch our mind and get familiar with what sort of habitual tendencies we have and what leads to those. What kind of objects tend to trigger off our attachment and aversion and so on, or what patterns of thinking, habitual ways of thinking will do that, or things in our lifestyle, like maybe working too hard or not going for walks or whatever. There could be things that we're doing or not doing that could also be contributing factors to the arisal of afflictions in our mind. And so just becoming aware of those and taking care of them. I was just thinking about, I came across this term, what is it? Hangry. Hangry? Yeah? Hangry, yeah. So it's like, and I could really relate to that. I have definitely seen that in my experience. When my stomach is hungry and I have to wait before I can eat, then I can easily get quite angry, irritated. But it's not just with hunger, also other kinds of physical discomfort, being hot, having pain, being uncomfortable. So it seems like when you're physically, me anyway, physically uncomfortable, then there's a greater chance for anger, irritation to arise in the mind. So if you notice that in your experience, then you can take precautions, like, okay, if this is starting to happen, I'm starting to get irritated because I'm hungry and the person giving the BBC just keeps going on and on and on and on. So, okay, what can I do to deal with that so it doesn't turn into anger? Yeah, so there's all kinds of methods. We have so many methods, thought training methods, Lojong methods for dealing with difficult situations. So these are some ways that we can, practical ways that we can stop the arisal of negative thoughts in our mind, negative behavior in our body and speech and so on. And then with the second supreme striving, which is abandoning non-virtuous states that have already arisen, how we can apply effort to that would be, for example, if we find ourselves feeling jealousy in our mind, instead of allowing it, tolerating it, we can overcome it by rejoicing in others' virtues. And then with the third of the supreme strivings, which is generating virtuous states that haven't yet arisen. So something we could do regarding that would be cultivating any and all virtuous practices of studying, thinking, and meditating. and specifically cultivating the 4 establishments of mindfulness and the 7 awakening factors. So just learning about the different virtuous practices and virtuous states of mind that are part of the path, and really putting our effort into cultivating those. And then with the 4th supreme striving, which is maintaining and increasing virtues that have already arisen, not letting them degenerate. Something we can do is sustaining favorable meditation objects so that full samadhi can be attained. So if we learn about and get familiar with certain meditation objects that can help us to develop samadhi or other positive qualities, such as meditating on the Buddha, then just make sure that we continue to practice those meditation objects. Focus on them, bring them to mind, and so on. So in the Pali tradition, it said that with these 4 supreme strivings, a practitioner is said to slant, slope, and incline toward nirvana. Slide toward nirvana. I think this is the actual words the Buddha uses. Anyway, going in that direction of nirvana. Okay, so yeah, I had prepared to start talking about the next group, but I think it's too much. We'll save it for next week. The next group is quite fun. It's the 4 legs of magical emanation. There's some juicy things in there. But yeah, I think this is enough for tonight. Any last questions or comments? I'm kind of stopping early because where we are, it's 8:45, so kind of getting close to our bedtime. And I'm tired too.
It seems like many of these strivings could describe practices that have already been described, like in the 4 establishments, or in other, describing antidotes to various afflictions. So would you say that these are just kind of categories or a framework for dividing different practices, but that it's not a separate practice?
I don't know. I mean, all of these were taught by the Buddha. As far as I understand, he did there's discourses where he explained each of these. And I mean, to me, it does seem that there's overlap and that's not a problem. I mean, one thing that I came across when I was preparing for the next group, which are these 4 legs of magical emanation, in the book, volume 4, it said that the 4 establishments of mindfulness are the mental factor of mindfulness together with wisdom. So that's, the main mental factor there. And then these 4 supreme strivings are the mental factor of effort or joyous effort. So there, it seems like a different mental factor is primary in these different groups. And then the 4 legs of magical emanation are the mental factor of concentration. So there could be other mental factors involved, but they're mainly that. So like when we're practicing the 4 establishments of mindfulness, it seems that the main mental factor that's being cultivated is mindfulness plus wisdom, not just mindfulness, but also wisdom that is investigating to understand the nature of these different objects, like the body and the feelings and so forth. Not just being aware of the body and the feelings, but what is their nature? You know, understanding the unsatisfactory, impure, impermanent nature of these objects. So that's mainly what's being cultivated with that particular group of the 37 harmonies. And then with these, the second group, the 4 supreme strivings, it's the mental factor of effort or energy. That's the one that's being cultivated and applied. And then the next group is concentration. So that might give you some clue, a helpful answer to that question. I mean, it seems like, yeah, to be able to progress along the path, both for nirvana, hearers and solitary realizers, nirvana, and also for full enlightenment, Buddhahood, a person does need to practice, cultivate and practice all of these 37. You can't say, oh, well, this one was already covered somewhere else, so I don't have to do that one. So I think maybe they just kind of add on to each other. Yeah. And build on each other. That's as far as I can understand. I'm still learning about these myself. I've heard, the list before, but never really went into them. So that's what I'm doing now, and I'm sharing it with you, learning as I go. But yeah, that's a good question. Because even within the 4 establishments of mindfulness, I sometimes felt there was some overlap. They weren't so strictly like strictly divided. Well, if there's no more questions, I think we could stop. So let's dedicate. Feel confident that we have created some merit by coming together, starting off with generating an altruistic motivation for participating in this class, and then trying our best to listen and learn and practice and cultivate positive aspirations to do these practices. So we've definitely created some merit, positive energy, and the best thing we can do with this merit is to share it with others. So you can remember the altruistic motivation we developed at the beginning, wanting to benefit others, all sentient beings as much as possible, and especially becoming enlightened to help them in the best possible way. So renew that wish to benefit others, and then mentally share the positive energy, the merit we've created with all other beings, that it will bring them peace, happiness, freedom from suffering, and eventually enlightenment, Buddhahood. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-fulfilling, wish-granting jewel, source of every benefit and happiness in this world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the 3 sublime ones, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Okay, thank you.
Thank you
for
so
joining
much, Venerable.
hosting.
Thank you.